It's estimated that 1 in 5 people in this world don't have access to electricity. Without electricity, you can't run things like lights, computers, heat your water, climate control, a multitude of things that we use electricity for. So for these 1.5 billion people in the world, it's pretty challenging to gain access to things like an education, run effective hospitals, conduct business with the rest of the world. The list kind of goes on and on. The majority of these people live in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, where there's very large spaces between small villages, so it's simply too expensive to bring the electricity from the point of generation to the villages. In order to make this technology accessible to them, cost-effective, I think we should have a look and see if we can take a lesson from a different technology that has become accessible to these types of communities, and that's telephones. 30 to 40 years ago, telephones were inaccessible to many parts of the world. They were simply too expensive. That's because a telephone needed to be connected to a central switching station through a set of wires. In order to build that electrical infrastructure, only wealthy countries were able to afford it, or densely populated centers. However, through the development of wireless communication, it became possible to install a wireless distribution center right in the point that you're interested in and connect the people living in that area with the rest of the world. So if we take a lesson from the world of telephones and making telephones affordable to the people in the developing world and apply it to the world of power generation, we may think that if we got rid of the wires to connect the generator to the village, we'd be able to make it cost effective. What if instead of having to invest in an electrical grid to bring the electricity to a remote village, we simply brought the generator source into the village? Then we wouldn't have to build this extensive electrical grid, and perhaps we'd be able to make it cost effective. So if we want to do that, how big would a generating facility actually have to be? In order to answer that, let's have a look at a couple loads that we might apply. Suppose you have a village of, say, 200 people. You've got 5 people living in a home, and so you've got about 40 homes that you need to power. Each home wants to run, let's say, a refrigerator, a computer, and some lights. So refrigerator's not always running, computer's not always running. Let's say 200 watts is needed in order to fulfill that electrical load. Multiply that by 40 homes and you've got 8 kilowatts. Suppose you want to add some electrical heating capability, an element to cook on. Not everybody's going to cook exactly at the same time, so let's say you need to add 20 or 30 kilowatts to power these elements. We're now talking about 40-ish max kilowatts. We're not talking about a huge power plant. Okay, so now that we've got sort of an idea as to how much power we might need for a small community, let's look at some of the technology that might be able to be used to accomplish that. If we use conventional technology, which relies on a fuel to heat water, to create steam, pass it by a turbine and generate electricity, these fuels are uranium, coal, natural gas. They're all essentially the same in the way they work. Not only do we get a decrease in efficiency with a decrease in power plant size, so we're going to generate less electricity per unit of fuel that we consume in these plants over larger centralized plants, we have to transport the fuel into that remote village, so that's going to cost energy as well. So if you're thinking maybe that doesn't sound like a great idea, I'd probably agree with you. So what if there was a source of energy that was available everywhere in the world? Something that didn't need to be transported by people, something that we could just use. That sounds like the sun, right? So the sun delivers energy to us on this planet in 2 forms, light and heat. Light energy we can use through photovoltaic solar panels. These panels are great. They're simple to use, easy to install. All you do is place them in direct sunlight out comes electricity. Except for when the sun doesn't shine, like at night and on cloudy days. So if you want to have a reliable source of electricity, you have to introduce electrical storage, batteries. Batteries last for about 5 to 10 years, and then they need to be disposed of or recycled in some way. So if we're looking at installing batteries with solar panels into remote locations, it becomes fairly challenging to convince someone to perhaps transport batteries by foot at their end of life to a recycling depot that's maybe 100 kilometers away when there's no tangible gains at the end of it. So we end up with a situation like this where batteries are disposed of and just left to rot in these villages. As the years pass and maybe you have more people in the village, the problem starts to look like this. And the chemicals in these battery packs are not so environmentally friendly. So we have maybe not the most sustainable solution on a go-forward basis. Okay, so let's look at another technology that we might be able to use. Sun delivers energy in the form of heat. Heat drives weather. So wind and rain are also indirect forms of solar energy that we might be able to use. A wind turbine is great. Wind blows at night, wind blows on cloudy days, wind blows on sunny days, sometimes. Sometimes it also doesn't blow at those times. Sometimes it doesn't blow for days at a time at all. So in order to have a somewhat reliable source of electricity from wind, again, we need to introduce batteries in order to store electricity for later. And you can imagine we're back to the same problem with the life cycle of batteries. What if we took a wind turbine, instead of placing it in wind, we place it in another fluid, in a river? This is called a hydrokinetic turbine. Like I said, very similar to a wind turbine, same technology, just specially designed for water. The only difference is water doesn't stop flowing. Rivers don't stop flowing. Rivers run day and night, rain or shine, a little bit more during the rain, but they're always flowing. I don't remember ever seeing the river take the day off. So this is a pretty great way to use a technology we already have and create a continuous source of electricity. Since these turbines are installed directly on water, they're rather small. They take a very small footprint. There's very few pieces, so they're easily transported. The way energy is extracted, the available energy in water is a function of two parameters, mass and velocity. When we're talking about a fluid, mass is usually referred to in terms of volume. So the size of the turbine impacts the amount of energy you can extract from the water, as well as how fast the water is moving impacts the amount of energy you can extract from the water. So we've got these two rivers. Let's say we put two turbines, one being twice the size of the other, into either one of these rivers. You get twice as much power out of the turbine that's twice as big. In terms of the velocity impact, the velocity is actually to the third power in terms of the impact on the amount of energy that's available. So if you put a turbine of the same size into the river on the right, you'd get 8 times as much energy out as if you did on the river on the left. The one on the right flowing twice as fast as the one on the left. So it sounds like a pretty good idea in theory, doesn't it? But I want to let you know this isn't just theory. This is actually already making a difference in the part of the developing world. This is the village of Ringmo, located high in the Himalayan mountains of Nepal. I was in Nepal last week, part of a project installing a 5 kilowatt hydrokinetic turbine to this village. Now, I told you this technology is transportable. Well, Ringmo is located 30 kilometers away from the nearest road. And the only connecting path is a goat path. You can walk on it by foot or horseback or yak. So our 5 kilowatt turbine had to be transported by yak. In case you're unaware, the load capacity of a yak is about 200 pounds. I know, maybe, I thought maybe you might know, but there's no component on a 5 kilowatt hydrokinetic turbine that weighs over 150 pounds. So by bringing this turbine to Ringmo, not only were we able to provide the villagers with a continuous source of electricity, the Acts were really happy on the way up because they weren't fully loaded either. Before we went and installed this turbine in the village of Ringmo, we sat down with them and asked them, if you had access to electricity, what would you like to run? Can you provide us a list of things that you would like to power with electricity? So they conferred amongst themselves and came back the next day, and we had a town meeting. Added up all of the components that they wanted to run. And the grand total of that list, by the way, this is a village of 200 people, it totaled up to 2.5 kilowatts. And this was their wildest dreams. So if we're going to accomplish providing a continuous source of power to some of these remote communities, we don't have to have megawatt-size power plants like we need in this part of the world. We need a small source of power, but it needs to be continuous. This is what that turbine looks like. This has completely revolutionized the lives of the people in this village. But there are many other villages that don't have power. So now that you have an awareness of this technology and the types of projects that it might be applied to, I invite you to visit distributedhydro.com, where you can join a growing group of activists and learn how to apply this technology into projects you're familiar with. Thank you.